I found that it's sort of become a superpower. When people talk to each other, like, and you sort of feel what's happening in the people.
Whatever business you have, we're all in people business. Whether you're in tech, whether you're in SaaS, whether you're in banking, finance, it doesn't matter. You're always in a people business.
I did like 7 or 8 years of improv where you learn to say stupid things and be ridiculous and go out anyways and be in front of an audience. And I used to change jobs every 2 years when I was bored, and now I change jobs every 2 hours. And it's really fun. I could have tested the idea in an Excel spreadsheet and realized that it wasn't going to work instead of putting hundreds of thousands of euros into when you want to talk about what you're doing, it's really universal. If you want to convince your spouse to, go to the beach instead of the mountains, the story structure is pretty similar than if you want to sell your widget or whatever on your website.
I love that phrase that you threw in the middle of they pre-live the experience. I love that idea. And I think if more businesses took that up, then we'd all be in a lot better place, because you're right.
It's better to be really loved by a smaller group of people than to be lukewarm for a large.
He didn't set out to teach storytelling. He lived a life that forced him to understand it. John Elbing is the strategist who helps companies stop talking at people and start seeing the world through their customers' eyes. He's the creator of the StoryBuilding method, a practical framework that turns scattered internal messages into stories that actually land. His own path moved through engineering, banking, innovation management, entrepreneurship, and startup coaching before he found a standpoint. Across those worlds, he became the quiet translator in the room, the person who could take the complexity, the emotion, and the conflicting priorities and shape them into something people actually understood. He's coached hundreds of founders across Europe and lectures in digital transformation and entrepreneurship at leading Swiss universities. His best-selling book, StoryBuilding, distills the method shaped not by theory alone, but by a lifetime of reinvention and the stories that pushed him forward. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's a genuine privilege, and I love having fellow storytellers on board the podcast, because it's one of the things I'm massively passionate about. I'm not to say I'm an expert storyteller in any way, shape, or form, but I love stories, and it's the foundation of this podcast now. So to have somebody who's built their career and their entire business around the idea of telling stories for businesses, it's a genuine privilege to have you along. I'm just going to dive straight into the thick of it, John, and get into the meat of the conversation. When you think about when you were younger, when you were a child, what were the clues that you saw things and people in patterns differently to the people around you?
So one of the things I think was that I was in a family there were no conflicts. No one raised their voice. And, the worst my parents could tell me was something like, "We're disappointed." There was, and so I came out, I didn't know how to manage conflict. And so conflict was a big problem for me. So I sort of got in the habit, if I needed to say something difficult, I sort of got in the habit of kind of rehearsing it in my head and then wondering, and then trying to feel what the other would feel, and then tweaking it so I could say it in a way that could be received by the other person. And at the beginning, it was really, to avoid conflict. But then it became a habit. It was a defense mechanism early on. But then I found that it's sort of become a superpower, where when people talk to each other, when interactions, I immediately can sort of feel what's happening in the people, and this kind of empathy of taking the other person's standpoint. My brand is standpoint, because it's really taking the other side's standpoint. And so when you're talking from their standpoint. It's their story. It's all this kind of thing. And that was 50 years ago. But I mean, so now it's sort of, I built that into what I do.
And when did you grow up, John? Because I'm conscious you're in Switzerland now, so the whole story is to where you got where you are now, right?
Yeah, I didn't get that. So yes, I'm in Switzerland. I was born in the States, and I came. My parents had a job opportunity. It was supposed to be just a year, and then 50 something years later, I'm still here. Everyone else moved back, and so yeah, that I guess there's some story there too.
It's a long journey for the holidays, right?
Yes, and especially now going to the
Yeah.
States. Yeah.
So then your first kind of step out from childhood into young adulthood was working in the engineering technology space, right?
Yeah, so I've always been good in math. I've always been very logical, and so I did. I did a good university here in Switzerland in math, and then computer science. I was a software engineer, and pretty quickly, I would say, I sort of switched into, project management and team management and things around, what do we build and what do we, kind of thing. And so one thing that was interesting, I came into a bank to to manage the internet. This was, turn of the century kind of thing. And it was just before their merger with a smaller bank. And there were 87 tasks force to manage this merger, all about tech, systems and data and stuff, and nothing around the people. So I went to see the partners saying, hey, we're going to pull the plug on everything they know, the networks, the connections, the everything. And they said, well, do you want to do something about that? And I did this change management thing where it was getting people to talk to each other and, realizing that these people were sort of scared to come into this new system and then do training and meetups and switching people around in teams and things, which wasn't at all my job. And so that was the first big experience of this idea of, being around people, how they feel, what they need, what the challenges, and not just the tech.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the MarketPulse Pros and Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
And I think that that's true no matter what business I look at, whatever business you have, we're all in the people business. Whether you're in tech, whether you're in SaaS, whether you're in banking, finance, it doesn't matter. You're always in a people business. But somehow we've become obsessed with the processes and the technology as opposed to the main component of any business, which is the human element, right?
Yeah, and I think, with AI coming along, it'll be more and more important. The human side is the one thing that'll never be quite automated. A lot of things they'll be able to do faster and better maybe with AI, but that real human element will always be important.
Well, believe me, when Judgment Day comes on, I'm first on the list to be knocked on the door by the robots. I think I'm not. ChatGPT is not over the moon with the way I talk to it sometimes. But I guess when you're in those, so you're in technical roles, project management, product management. There's not a lot of people at a young age understand the people element of that. Normally, when I speak to people, it's people who have matured in their years somewhat and been around a long time and start to see that actually the people are far more important than the technical aspects. Is that something that you tweaked onto at a young age then, would you say? You kind of saw beyond all that early on and were able to get ahead because of that, do you think?
I don't even think that's it. I don't know. I guess I was, being in this, American, in a Swiss school, with not perfect French, I was the right kind of foreigner. There are other foreigners that weren't, that might be the wrong kind of foreigner. So I was sort of I was always felt accepted and brought in, and it was more a positive and something interesting. And so I got into that and felt that was pretty, that was kind of easy. Pretty young, I had a studio. I lived on my own. And so all the parties were at my place kind of thing. So yeah, but I think the real next step was this idea. I always wanted to be, and there's probably some, something behind that too. I wanted to present. I wanted to be on the stage, in all these different jobs. If you had to do a thing and presenting and things like that. And really think if you're a team and one knows how to present and one knows how to do the actual job, it's the one that's going to present that's going to get more of the credit. Learn to talk about what you're doing. But so I always volunteered to do the presentations, and I was really, really bad at it. But somehow I kept at it. There are other things I was bad at that I gave up on, like being a salesperson. But and I tried and I tried and I tried. And then at one point there was this click to say, instead of trying to learn by heart, to format it as much as possible, go the other way and tell a story. Sort of like, slide deck, for each slide, the story you want to tell, and you tell it. And that is 100 times better than having this fixed, rehearsed thing. And that was quite a click, this idea to, and then the other thing is that I went into improv, theater. And so I did like 7 or 8 years of improv where you learn to say stupid things and be ridiculous and go out anyways and be in front of an audience. And finally, all these years later, I'm much more comfortable, talking in public and, inventing stories on the fly and things like that. But I wouldn't say I was a natural. I mean, I've met people that, sort of a natural salesperson or the natural this, but I really feel, I mean, if you go at it, you can get there. I mean, you have to have the motivation. And so that's sort of part of it. So, when I'm working with a company, I can sort of tell their story, bringing all these elements together. I've developed a methodology, I have a theory behind it and all these things, but then I can also take their customer standpoint and tell a story as they would want to hear it. And often, that is, they're a little bit surprised and they're struggling about that.
So if we think about the industries you've worked in lots of different industries that all wouldn't necessarily connect together. There's not, from the outside perspective, a logical link. How did you move between them, or what was the connecting elements for you? Was it just kind of happen, chance and circumstance, or was there a plan behind it all that you followed?
Well, I would say, I had a job as a software engineer. So then I got into tech, and then, just in the, late previous century, or late 20th century, I did the first internet, e-banking sites for some banks. But that brought me into, other different kinds of projects. And then I think tech has been the thing, I kept going into tech. But I did a MBA in finance, and I thought, finance, never again. But to have that kind of background, I mean, a lot of these things, I haven't programmed in decades, but somehow I can talk tech. And finance is really not my thing, but I can talk finance. And then I did some startups that didn't work. And then I had to pay the bills. So I went and worked for marketing agencies. So again, I'm not doing websites and Google ads or anymore, but I have this marketing background. So somehow this mix is I can talk to people on these different levels, and how does the tech, but then how the finance and the marketing and the thing all come together. And that's how I think I got into startup coaching. So I've been doing that for 10 years or more, where I've had anything from, really high tech, I have one that's a wristband that analyzes your emotions and injects them into video games, and the video game changes based on your emotions. And then that's in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I talk to the world leader of garden shears. And then there's a coffee machine. And then there's, some, online service with AI. And then there's something else. And sort of, I used to change jobs every 2 years when I was bored. And now I change jobs every 2 hours. And it's really fun.
So what was the point where you decided that you were going to go out away from the corporate world and find, you mentioned you've run your own startups, you've had 5 startups. What was the point where you thought a corporate career was no longer what you wanted to pursue? Was there a turning point?
Well, I sort of feel I could have try any job in the world, and the length, but at some point I'll get bored. And so, I had some really interesting jobs, and I stayed, a few years, and some less where it was less long, but somehow I guess I don't like having a boss, and I don't like really being a boss either. And so being independent is that balance, and I want to always try new things. So then one was the startup. And then I realized, well, I love the idea behind a startup. I did this crazy project and thing and everything. And then you have to actually sit down and do it and administrate it and have a company and, and pay salaries and stuff. And that wasn't really for me. I did this incredible ride sharing application that was probably a mix of Uber, way before Uber. And no one ever sat in the car. And so my friends say that I was too early, but I know the real story that, that I built this amazing thing, but I probably could have tested the idea in an Excel spreadsheet and realized that it wasn't going to work instead of putting hundreds of thousands of euros into it.
It's an amazing journey, though. It's an amazing journey. And I think it's an amazing amount of self-awareness to be able to figure out where you want to sit in the world. And I also think it's an amazing connection. I find we talked about this offline. Like I think you and I are very aligned in that. I've got a technical background as well. I was once a software engineer. I never programmed in anger is what I jokingly refer to it as. I realized when I finished university that I didn't want to spend the rest of my career sat behind a desk. And so I went out into the big wide world and I did retail for 15 years and 10 years as a volunteer police officer. And then realized that actually people are really tired most of the time. So actually I do want to sit behind a desk for the rest of my career. I've done my bit in the real world and now I can deal with people on screens and sometimes in a coffee shop, and it's much nicer. So I do feel like we're very much aligned along that side of things. But at what point did you start getting involved with universities as well? Because you lecture at universities, right?
So I think there's a question of an ecosystem. So I started coaching for this one big incubator here in Geneva. And then, through their connections, I got into the statewide innovation platform. And then when you're known, the local university, you get a 1-day course here, and that gets you into one more. And then there's another platform, and then there's another thing. But right now I'm coaching projects for there's a Swiss state humanitarian program. So it's all NGOs that are in international cooperation. And because, someone heard about someone and connect me and that's a lot of fun.
Love that. Has there ever been a moment where you were asked to look at a project or a business and you just thought, how am I here? Like, am I able to do this justice? Like, this is outside my skill set? Or do you believe that kind of everything's, as long as you stay within your area of expertise, that you could support anyone with any business? How does it work in your head?
So I have this kind of general thing where I can talk at a certain level on, about finance and marketing and product and tech and things. And then I have specialized in storytelling, where I built this methodology over, number of working through, I went back to Nashville to get certified in StoryBrand, which is this one storytelling framework and all that. But I'm very, very open to what I'm good at and what I'm less good at. So, and I can redirect people. So, at a certain level, that's good enough. And if you need more than that, go see Bob or Mary or whatever, because they're really good at what they do. Yeah. So yeah. But it is fun that I feel that when you want to talk about what you're doing, it's really universal. I mean, if you want to convince your spouse to, go to the beach instead of the mountains, the story structure is pretty similar than if you want to sell your widget or whatever on your website. I've worked with nonprofits. I've worked with associations. humanitarian thing. I've worked with really deep tech, but a company that makes pumps for, cars pulling trailers or something, and that mix, allows you to sort of say, okay, who are you talking to, and what are their aspirations? What are their challenges? Well, how can you help, kind of thing, and trigger stuff.
So tell us about story building then. So it's your framework, your business that you've built. Well, it's your process that you build your business around, right? Like, walk us through what it means to your clients when you work with them.
So I called it story building instead of storytelling. I find that storytelling is this buzzword that's everywhere, that is sort of like, how can we put a nice little coat of paint on our story? Start like this and do. And story building is the fact of, building the story that you want to tell. Then you can go and do a website or a pitch or a video or a campaign. And what I found is that when we encounter a brand, we go through 3 steps. And I feel that a lot of companies sort of ignore that, this first step and the last steps kind of thing. So the first step, I think I call recognition, is you have to recognize yourself in your brand. So, if I go on to, I'm an independent consultant, I'm looking for some app and it says, we're the best for teams. And I think, well, that's for me. And they lost me. And maybe it works very well for me on my own, but I'm not their target. And if I land on a thing that says, we're specialized in independent consultants with a white beard and a cat living in Switzerland, I think, well, I'm not sure what they do, but damn, they know me. So I'm going to look. You walk down the street, you want to have a coffee with a friend, you're going to pass 3 coffee shops without even slowing down. And then one will be the one, because somehow you recognize yourself. And I think a lot of companies sort of say, hey, we do this. And it's up to you to figure out if it's for you. And people, you waste a lot of energy to say, is that for me? Is that for bigger companies, small companies? Who is that for? And that's enough for you to switch and go look at the next, you did the next. So there's a lot of emotion in that. It's, do they recognize my aspirations, my challenges, and you think, young fathers worry about the nutrition of their babies. And, if you're a young father, you think, oh, well, yes. And if you're not, great too, because you're not going to get the wrong people either. And then you have to talk about what you do. And so, usually companies know how to talk about what they do. That middle part is pretty easy, even though I think you can insist on things like differentiation. Everything is out there. So people don't necessarily want to know, is there a benefit to that? It's, why is it different from the next one? There's a lot about what category you're in and things like that. But anyway, so once I think, oh, that's great. I'm going to go do that. And then so that I call perception. And then there's a third step called projection, which is this idea to say, okay, what is it going to be like? So I have to buy it, and then I'm going to install it, but then I have to set it up, and then I have to learn how to use it. And I have to use my old system in parallel to the new system. And then, but if I have a problem, will they be there? And then how do I recycle it? And then, and I think, okay, I'm going to really do this, but I'll come back next week. And then I don't.
Yeah.
And so if you can accompany people through that process, so they feel, oh, okay, that's going to be easy. I get that. And remind them of, but it's going to solve this, this, and this. And close your eyes and imagine this positive future. So in this process, with a strong recognition at the beginning, you sort of have a better quality pipeline, because it's the right people that are looking at what you're doing. And then if you can accompany them to do a few steps, they pre-live working with you, they're a few steps farther down that pipeline in engagement. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to look back and I'm going to look and evaluate, they think, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. What's the next step? And so overall, that makes quite a difference in engagement. And so if you can build a story where people recognize themselves, they emotionally, they understand intellectually what's going on, then they sort of already want to, they're already stepping into what it'll be like. That's often, so sometimes companies don't do some of those, or do it in the wrong order. They say, hey, this is really easy to buy, and I'm not there yet. Or, or way at the end, they say, this is for this person, but it's too late, or things. And so this going through those steps in that order actually works pretty well.
I love that phrase that you threw in the middle of they pre-live the experience. I love that idea. And I think if more businesses took that up, then we'd all be in a lot better place, because you're right. Like, businesses give a certain experience, they give a certain feeling, they work in a certain way. And all we want as consumers is to know what that's going to be like in advance, and just be honest with us. And I think if you can do that, then the benefits are not just making the sale, but keeping your customers, reducing your churn, increasing what they spend, because we're so much better aligned between what they expected and what you deliver. And I think if you get that right, then you also, it limits on what you feel you need to deliver, because some people are obsessed with delivering exceptional customer experience, for example. The program is just the best program you'll ever use in your life. It doesn't need to be. It needs to do what it says on the tin. It needs to do it the way we said we were going to do it. And we need to deliver on that consistently. But it doesn't, it's like IKEA, right? Like, IKEA doesn't deliver amazing customer experience, but we know what we're going to get before we walk through the doors. We know exactly what it'll be like every time we walk in. And when we walk out, we know what we're going to walk out with and what we have to do when we get home. But I think if more businesses could just be that honest, rather than worrying about their image or trying to attract a larger market. And again, it goes back to that recognition at the beginning, right?
Well, I feel
got to cut some people off.
Not only that, to this honesty, but by taking your customer standpoint, you often realize, well, actually, this little thing is really important for them. I've told this story too many times, but there was this plumber that had, their ad was, "We're on time." It wasn't, "We're a good plumber," because people weren't worried that they wouldn't be a good plumber. What they're worried is that they have to wait around all day. And by recognizing that, they were able to connect and say, not only, oh, great, they'll be on time, but they take that into account. They understand that that's important for me. And then of course you have to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be, like we said, it has to be that honest kind of vision for the business. What are we about? Because you can't be about everything. You have to be about something or a bunch of things, and identifying what that is clearly. I think that's a beautiful. So, like, if I'm a startup now, looking at who I am, how we conduct. So I've got my product there and I'm ready to go out to market. What is it that what's the first steps for them that they can sit down and do today, perhaps, that sets them on the right path?
So, what I've developed is I have a series of canvases. So there's these, there's squares, and each square you have to say, so what, who is your customer? And then what are their aspirations? And then what are their challenges? And what triggers them? And all these questions. And often I found that, well, first of all, it's just this idea of flipping the script and taking your customer standpoint and stop. How can I talk about what I do? It's sort of like, how can I, talk about their situation and how I fit in to make their life better? And it's funny because, sometimes companies will sort of say, since I give this service, the problem must be that they don't have my service, kind of. It's really that one-on-one thing. But in people's minds, it can be something completely different. So all these steps, you really have to play around with, who is my client and how can I describe them so they really recognize themselves? And that means often niching down. It's better to be really loved by a smaller group of people than to have, sort of be lukewarm for a large. So one example I worked with a nonprofit that was into water purification. And normally water purification is you bring chlorine in powder form in a truck, and then you put it in the water, and that, purifies the water and people don't get sick. And they have a system where they produce chlorine on site with electrolytes and salt and water. And so I said, what's the problem? And the problem is people get sick. And then we digged into it and we realized, no, the problem is that trucks get stuck in the mud. And so on these sites, sometimes there was a storm or a thing or something, and the truck doesn't arrive and people get sick. And so by producing it locally, so what kept these people up at night was, managing the logistics of the trucks. Of course, at the end of the day, the whole point is for people not to get sick. But we weren't really helping them not get sick. We're helping them being sure that, this continuity and things like that. And there's surprisingly often this level of, you stop at that first, straightforward thing that's the most obvious. But if you can express it a little bit differently and actually how people think about it, AI is everywhere. And often you see these, this AI thing is a miracle. It'll do these amazing things. And so I've worked with a number of companies, and you find that there are a lot of companies that understand that they can gain productivity and do some good things with AI. So that they don't need convincing about the potential. They need convincing about, we manage privacy, we manage hallucinations, we have a setup, we can accompany you to get to doing this instead of, because everyone is saying, hey, with us, it's going to be a miracle. Well, you once you see that 100 times, you don't know who to believe. And so if you tackle that doubt instead of tackling just this first level feature, it actually connects pretty well.
And I think that's what you said, the very last sentence that you said is the connection, right? So I think it's not just that people are able to see that you understand their problem, but they also recognize that you've seen them, that you've looked into their life, their role, you feel seen. And actually the trust that creates, this person actually understands me. Therefore, their product, even if it's more expensive, their service, even if it's harder to start up, but, in the long run provides the same benefits, actually, I'd rather work with somebody who gets me. And I think we're all after that. I think that is the big differentiator for so many businesses. The ability to help your customer feel like they can recognize themselves in you, as you said. I think that's a beautiful way of.
And I think that's a good place to start. If you have a company and you sort of wonder, how can you, level up a little bit your messaging and all that, start out by, of course, take your customer standpoint, but then describe them as they would, want to be described. A lot of these software companies talk about users, but no one thinks of themselves as a user. I mean, that word is so, you're defined as the fact that you use my service, no,
I'm the solutions consultant that uses yours. I'm the designer that uses your services. I get it. I think that's beautiful. I think it's a lovely way to, John, I could probably talk to you all afternoon on this topic and dig deeper and deeper. I think we'd have to have you back on the show if you'd be open to it. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today. If there's anything you'd like to leave the audience with, what's that one thought?
Well, I guess, hey, go onto my website, standpoint.ch. I'm in Switzerland, CH. And drop me a message in my contact form and say you're coming from Paul. And then I'll set up an hour session and we can talk about your brand.
Can't say fairer than that. Thank you so much for your time today, John. It's been an absolute pleasure talking about story building with you. I'll see you around in the feed and we will have to stay in touch. Thank you for your time.
Great. Well, thank you, Paul. This has been great fun.
Take care. See you later.
Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management.
Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review.